A warm welcome to each one of you. Let's recall a familiar situation. There's a birth in the family, there's a newborn, a new arrival, and all of us have come to see that baby. After the excitement of seeing the newborn, the next question is, who does the baby resemble? Does it look like its mother or does it look like its father? And immediately comparisons are made. Yes, the nose just like that of the mother, the eyes just like that of the father. Why do we make these comparisons? Because we resemble our parents. All these comparisons are based on the inheritance of genes. So let us see more about genetics. I am dealing with Class 12 Biology, Chapter 6, Molecular Basis of Inheritance. So let's start off. What are the learning objectives for today's lesson? To understand in depth concepts like replication, transcription, translation, etc. that forms the basis for the central dogma of molecular biology. Also to develop interest in the field of genetics. So we start off by seeing this picture of the cell. So let's go into the nucleus and see what's there. Yes, there are these chromosomes. Okay, the chromosomes are maximum visible in the metaphase stage. So that's the nucleus bound by the nuclear membrane, and you can see there are a number of chromosomes. In fact, we human beings are diploid. Diploid means we got half the set of chromosomes from the father and half from the mother. That's why we resemble both our parents. So let's see. Here's the chromosome, one chromosome enlarged, and the chromosome has genes which are expressed in the form of eye color, hair color, height, skin color, etc. So how are these genes expressed? The genes are located on the DNA. They form RNA by a process of transcription. The DNA forms RNA by transcription, and RNA forms proteins by a process called translation. So how does all this happen? Let us see. So here's that chromosome, a part of that chromosome. If we are unwinding it, just like unwinding reels of a thread, then you find this solenoid. You find it's coming out like a solenoid. So if we further unwind that solenoid, you will find it is made up of chromatin fibers. Can you see over there the chromatin fibers? And in an electron micrograph, it looks somewhat like this. Beads on a string. Just like you have a chain and there are beads on it, also there is the string. Heterochromatin is densely packed, stains dark, and is transcriptionally inactive. But look at euchromatin. It is loosely packed, stains light, and is transcriptionally active, which means that chromatin will form RNA and then it can form proteins. Here you can see an electron micrograph of the nuclear membrane with the nuclear pore. So inside here there is the nucleus and outside it there will be the cytoplasm. So you can see the heterochromatin is close to the nuclear membrane. It is broken in those areas where there are the nuclear pores, whereas the euchromatin is towards the center of the nucleus, like this. This is euchromatin and heterochromatin is closer to the nuclear membrane. Further, when we unwind, it looks like beads on a string. So those beads are actually nucleosomes, and the string is made up of DNA. So this structure is called a nucleosome. What is that? Negatively charged DNA wrapped around the positively charged histone octamer. Histones are positively charged because they are rich in basic amino acids like lysine and arginine. They are organized to form a unit of 8 molecules, hence the term octamer. And a typical nucleosome contains 200 base pairs of DNA helix wound around it. So once again, you can see 8 of them organized as an octamer. Here's the DNA coiling around it, and it is kept in position by that H1 histone. The genetic material has to be packaged and kept nicely. So for that, there are certain other proteins which are called NHC, non-histone chromosomal proteins. So continuing with our unwinding, see, when we unwind that beads on a string structure, you get the histone octamer like that, and the string is actually made up of the double helical structure of DNA. I am sure you are familiar with this double helical structure. This molecule is the reason why you compared that child. You tried to find the resemblances of that child either with the mother or with the father. So the backbone of DNA is made up of alternating sugar and phosphate. You can see the pentose sugar here. Over here, this is the pentose sugar and the phosphate group. On the other strand also there is phosphate and sugar, like that. Whereas the nitrogenous bases are to the inside, they are facing the inside, and the nitrogenous bases are attached to the sugar, to the pentose sugar. So we will see that structure in great detail. Here you find a single polynucleotide chain. This could be that of the RNA or DNA, but here you can identify it is that of the DNA because you find the nitrogenous base thymine. Thymine is absent in RNA, it is present only in DNA. Two nucleotides are linked together by a linkage called 3' 5' phosphodiester linkage. Thus it forms a dinucleotide. Again a third one will come and attach. Like that, when many of them link together, we get a polynucleotide chain. If it is DNA, there will be the double-stranded polynucleotide chain. I think by now you can identify the backbone is made up of alternating sugar and phosphate, another sugar, another phosphate, like that on both the strands. And attached to the sugar, there will be the nitrogenous bases which are linked by hydrogen bonds. So here you find A double bond T, T double bond A, G triple bond C, and C triple bond G. So this is a double-stranded polynucleotide chain. What I have marked here as 1, that is the phosphate group. Nitrogenous base is marked as number 2. You can see the 2 rings over there. More details about that we will be studying shortly. And the third one, number 3, that is the pentose sugar. So these 3 components make up a nucleotide: phosphate group, nitrogenous base, and pentose sugar. Pentose means 5-sided sugar. In DNA, it is deoxyribose, and in RNA, it is called ribose. Basically, they are almost the same, except that at this point, attached to the 2 carbon, it is H in the case of deoxyribose, and OH in the case of ribose. Now going on to the nitrogenous bases, they are classified into two as purines and pyrimidines. Purines, you can see examples are adenine and guanine, A and G. They are the purines. So they are heterocyclic aromatic organic compounds with two rings. Can you see? There are two rings. The other kind of nitrogenous base is called pyrimidine. They are also heterocyclic aromatic organic compounds, but here the difference is they have only one ring, a single ring. So examples, cytosine, thymine and uracil. I used to get confused how to remember it. So pyrimidine, that Y is there, Y, the alphabet. Here also cytosine has Y, thymine also has Y. And then uracil, that is the nitrogenous base present only in RNA. So these three, cytosine, thymine and uracil are called pyrimidines. Another term, nucleoside. It's a different term. Nucleoside we can say is nucleotide minus the phosphate. Nucleotide without the phosphate. So in other words, nucleoside will have only pentose sugar and nitrogenous base. So over here you can see the nitrogenous base with a single ring, and this one here is the pentose sugar. And the two of them are attached by a bond called N-glycosidic linkage. So which are the different nucleosides? If it is related to adenine, then we call it adenosine. So adenine, here you can see there is the adenine attached to a ribose sugar. That's called adenosine. Or it could be cytidine, that is cytosine attached to the ribose sugar. Or guanosine. There you can see guanine attached to the ribose sugar. And the last one is uridine, uracil attached to the ribose sugar. These four are the nucleosides found in RNA. Now if it is DNA, it will be known like this, deoxyadenosine. There adenine is attached to a deoxyribose sugar, or it could be deoxyguanosine, deoxythymidine. There you can see thymine is attached to the deoxyribose sugar, and the last one is deoxycytidine, where cytosine is attached to the deoxyribose sugar. All of you must be familiar with ATP. Now can you correlate? Adenosine triphosphate, ATP. It's known as the energy currency of the cell. This is adenine, the two rings of adenine, which is a purine. Here's the pentose sugar, and attached to the carbon of the sugar, you can see there are 1, 2 and the third phosphate. So that is adenosine triphosphate, or what we call ATP. If one of this phosphate is lost, it becomes ADP, adenosine diphosphate. And if it is having only one phosphate, then it will be called adenosine monophosphate, or AMP. So the phosphate group is linked to the OH of the 5' carbon of the nucleoside through phosphoester linkage. It was this scientist, Friedrich Miescher, in 1869 who first identified DNA as an acidic substance present in the nucleus, and he called it nuclein. It should be able to generate its own replica. It should be stable chemically and structurally. It should express itself in the form of Mendelian characters. And it should provide scope for slow changes or mutations which are required for evolution. Those are the criteria of a good genetic material. So, generally all organisms have DNA as the genetic material, except retroviruses where they don't have DNA, instead they have RNA as the genetic material. Now, let us see more about the DNA. The full form is deoxyribonucleic acid. It is a double helical structure. It has the 4 nitrogenous bases: thymine, adenine, guanine and cytosine. The sugar in it is called deoxyribose and it has a 3' OH group. So, the scientists James Watson and Francis Crick, they were the first to work out the double helical structure of DNA based on the work done by 2 other scientists, a lady by the name Rosalind Franklin and another scientist Morris Wilkins, who are often credited for capturing the images of the molecule that made this possible by Watson and Crick. So, they could get that structure through a technique called X-ray diffraction. So, here you can familiarize yourselves with the various scientists. This is Morris Wilkins, that is Rosalind Franklin, James Watson and Francis Crick. Watson and Crick proposed a structure called the double helical structure of the DNA. What are the salient features of this double helical structure that they proposed? They said that DNA is made up of 2 polynucleotide chains. By now you are familiar, polynucleotides, many nucleotides attached one after the other. The backbone of the DNA is made up of alternating sugar and phosphate. Nitrogenous bases project to the inner side of the DNA. So, here you have the backbone made up of alternating phosphate and sugar, phosphate and sugar, phosphate and sugar, like that on both sides, and the nitrogenous bases are there to the inside. The 2 chains have anti-parallel polarity. This is 5' to 3' and the other one is 3' to 5'. So, they are wound over each other in a double helical manner, just like a spiral staircase. The 2 chains are coiled in a right-handed fashion and the pitch of the helix is 3.4 nanometers, and you can see the width of the DNA molecule is 2 nanometers. So, there are 10 base pairs in each turn and the distance between each base pair is 0.34 nanometers. Between them there is a distance of 0.34 nanometers. The plane of one base pair is stacked over the other in the double helix. You can see this is one base pair that happens to be T double bond A. That is lying above this one below, that is C triple bond G. This and the hydrogen bonds between the nitrogenous bases will give stability to the double helical structure of DNA. The base pairing is based on Chargaff's rules, which states that for DNA, the ratios between adenine and thymine and guanine and cytosine is a constant and that equals to 1. So, between thymine and adenine there is a double hydrogen bond and between guanine and cytosine there is a triple hydrogen bond, and together the ratio should be 1. So here you can see in detail thymine having a double bond with adenine. Similarly, over there you can see the triple hydrogen bond between, this is cytosine having one ring and guanine with two rings. So that was proposed by the scientist Erwin Chargaff. So by now you would have understood this is the basis of inheritance, the chromosome, which you inherited half from the father and half from the mother's side. So you have 46 chromosomes. If we unwind the chromosomes, they appear like this, like a solenoid. The chromatin appears like beads on a string. You can see the string with beads, that is the histone octamer. So this structure is called a nucleosome. The histone octamer wound by DNA, that's called a nucleosome. If we further unwind it, the beads will be separated, that is histone octamer is separated, and this is the DNA which looks like a thread. But on closer observation you will find it is having the double helical structure with the sides made of alternating sugar and phosphate and the nitrogenous bases placed on the inside and wound like a spiral staircase. So this is the basis for inheritance. Now moving on to the other genetic material, RNA, ribonucleic acid, which unlike DNA is having only a single strand. It is also having 4 nitrogenous bases, that is adenine. It does not have thymine, instead it has uracil, cytosine and guanine. It has a sugar by the name ribose sugar and it is having the 2-OH group, the 2'OH group. Why is RNA very unstable? What makes it unstable? These are the reasons. RNA is catalytic and highly reactive. Presence of uracil instead of thymine will give it lesser stability. Similarly, in RNA, every nucleotide residue has an additional OH group present at the 2' position in the ribose. So this highly reactive group called 2'OH makes RNA labile and easily degradable. Why do retroviruses evolve faster? This is because RNA is reactive, unstable and mutates very fast. So viruses having RNA genome and shorter lifespan mutate and evolve faster. Moving on to another term, nucleoid. Prokaryotes don't have nucleus, but the naked DNA lies in the cytoplasm. However, that DNA is organized in large loops and held properly in position by proteins. So look at this picture. It shows a bacterium with the nucleoid. There is no nucleus but DNA held by proteins. So that genetic material region, that is called the nucleoid. And over there you can see a small circular DNA which is called plasmid. This is generally used by biotechnologists for various experiments. Now, certain scientists did experiments to prove that DNA is the genetic material. One scientist was Frederick Griffith. He used mice and a bacterium by the name Streptococcus pneumoniae, which can cause pneumonia, but not all strains, not all varieties. Only the S strain, which is having a smooth coat, is virulent. It can cause pneumonia. But the R strain having the rough coat is non-virulent. So this was his experiment. When he injected live S into mice, the S being virulent caused pneumonia and the mice died. When he injected live R, the mice survived. In the third experiment, he injected heat-killed S. Then also the mice survived. But look at the fourth experiment. There he put in a mixture of live R and heat-killed S. So actually the mice were expected to live, but all of them developed pneumonia and died. Was it because the S strain came back alive? No. The answer is no. Instead, the DNA from the heat-killed S transformed the live R. So what was having a rough coat developed a smooth coat and became virulent. So this proves that DNA is the genetic material. Proof for this transforming principle, biochemical nature of this transforming principle of Griffith, was given by these three scientists, Oswald Avery, Macklin McCarty and Colin MacLeod. What they did is, they purified biochemicals from the heat-killed S. Biochemicals means chemicals like DNA, RNA and protein, and they injected it into the live R cells to see which of them could transform live R into S. The result was that DNA alone could do this transformation, whereas RNA, proteins, etc. could not transform them, proving that DNA is the genetic material. They also found that when proteases and RNases were added to that experiment, the result did not change, which means the live R were transformed into S. But on digestion with DNases, the transformation was inhibited. In that case, when they used DNase, then the live R did not get transformed. So all these experiments by them showed that DNA is the genetic material. Another experiment was done by this lady, Martha Chase, and another person, Alfred Hershey. So it is called the blender experiment or the Hershey-Chase experiment. They used bacteriophages, that is viruses that attack bacteria, and the bacterium E. coli. So what they did is, they made two phage preparations, two viral preparations. In one preparation, they used the radioactive sulfur 35, and in the other one they used phosphorus 32. So when sulfur 35 was used, that radioactive sulfur you can see incorporated in the outer protein coat of the virus, in the capsid of the virus, whereas phosphorus is a component of DNA. So when radioactive P32 was used, it incorporated in the genetic material of the virus, of the bacteriophage. Now both these were allowed to infect E. coli separately. So where sulfur 35 was used, at the end of the experiment they found the E. coli did not develop any radioactivity. But where phosphorus 32 was used, they found the radioactivity went into the E. coli, whereas the outer protein coat of the virus did not contain any radioactivity. So this is the gist of the blender experiment. The three steps are infection, blending and centrifugation. So before doing infection, what was done? They had incorporated sulfur 35 to this phage preparation, and over there they had incorporated phosphorus 32. So after infection, blending was done to remove the empty capsids, and later when centrifugation was done, the heavier bacterial pellets settled at the bottom and the supernatant liquid contained the capsid, the empty protein coat. So in this case, the bacterial pellet did not develop any radioactivity, showing that protein is not the genetic material. But where phosphorus 32 was used, there the radioactivity was concentrated in the bacterial pellets, showing that it was DNA which was passed on as genetic material. Now this is the central dogma of molecular biology as proposed by Crick. According to this, DNA can multiply by a process called replication. DNA will pass the information to RNA through transcription, and RNA can form proteins by a process called translation. One more addition is there. In the case of retroviruses which are having RNA as the genetic material, for example HIV, the virus which causes AIDS, when they enter into your body, they are having RNA and they can produce viral DNA by reverse transcription. So a reverse arrow mark is there where RNA will form DNA, that is called reverse transcription. So if you can understand this much, this is the basis of what you are learning about genetic materials, how they act, how do they produce proteins, that is just by forming RNA. So in simple words I can say DNA which is limited to the nucleus, which is containing all the information. It's acting like a king and the nucleus is its kingdom. The king doesn't go to each and every citizen. The king has appointed ministers. So RNA we can say is one of the ministers. And proteins we can say are the ordinary citizens. So DNA forms RNA by transcription and RNA forms body proteins through translation. And you know our body is made up of mainly proteins. Your skin is protein, muscles are proteins, your hair and nails, they have proteins, antibodies, they are proteins, enzymes, they have proteins. So all that information to make the correct protein comes from the king, which is the DNA. So DNA forming daughter DNA, that is called replication. So here's a picture showing replication. During the time of replication, the two strands will unwind and separate. So the old strands are shown in blue color and the new strands are shown in red color. So both the strands are acting as models, as template to form the new DNA strand. Okay? And these two are the enzymes. That enzyme which is making DNA is called DNA polymerase. So other than DNA dependent DNA polymerase, there are helicases which unwind the helix. There is another enzyme called DNA ligase which will seal the gaps. Yet another one called topoisomerase which is also helping in easy unwinding of the DNA helix during replication. So when the DNA is separating, the two strands are separating, it appears like this, a Y-shaped structure which is termed as the replication fork. Replication fork. So once again I hope you can understand, the old strand is shown in blue color and the new strand is shown in red color to make it easy for you. So compare the synthesis on both these strands. One of the strands on the left side is easily forming the new strand in the 5' 3' direction. So it is called the leading strand, and the synthesis here is called continuous synthesis. But look at the other strand, it is having difficulty. It can't make the new strand easily. So it is adopting a shortcut. It is forming short stretches, which are called Okazaki fragments. And once the fragments have been formed, then the gap between them is sealed by an enzyme called ligase. So there you find there is discontinuous synthesis, and that strand is called the lagging strand. So another picture of the replication fork. When you unwind the chromosomes, it's the DNA. So the two strands separate, and there's the DNA polymerase enzyme, and both the strands are forming two new strands. So one DNA becomes two daughter DNA. The next step is transcription, where DNA forms RNA, single stranded RNA. So this again you identify, these two lines symbolize the double helical DNA. If we straighten it out, it looks like this. So that much part of the DNA which is forming RNA, that is called the transcription unit. The part of the DNA, of the long DNA strand, only a part is forming RNA. So at its end, at this end you find there is a structure called the promoter, and at the other end there is the terminator. So in between these two structures there are the two strands. So this one, the 3' to 5', which is forming the RNA, is called the template strand. The other one, which is shown here in light green color, it is not forming RNA, however it is called coding strand. So why are both strands not copied together? What could be the reason? Two reasons. If both strands are copied, they would code for RNA with different sequences. So the amino acid sequence will be different and wrong proteins will be made. That is one reason. Second reason is the two RNAs would be complementary and they will form dsRNA, double stranded RNA, which will twine up and which will be silenced. If double stranded RNA forms, then it can't do translation or protein synthesis. So here's a picture. I think you can identify the DNA in blue color. So where it is forming the RNA, the two strands have separated, and this is the enzyme RNA polymerase, and by reading the template strand you can see slowly the nitrogenous bases are being brought in and the RNA strand is forming. It is becoming longer. So that's the coding strand which is not forming the RNA. This one given in red is the template strand, 3' to 5'. By reading that, you can see RNA is forming. That is called transcription. So look at it. Opposite C, the RNA will be having G as per the base pairing rule. Opposite G, there will be C. Opposite T, there will be A. Again over here, opposite A, there will be no thymine because this is RNA, it will be uracil. So if you have a look at the RNA, it will look exactly like the coding strand, like this strand. The only difference is wherever there is thymine over there, the RNA will be having uracil. So one more simple picture. You can see the enzyme RNA polymerase. This is the DNA. Where the RNA polymerase is attached and forming the RNA, the two strands have separated, and based on the 3' to 5' strand, you can see the RNA is forming, shown here in green color. So, the method of DNA replication was called semi-conservative replication. This was proposed by two scientists, Watson and Crick. According to them, each daughter DNA formed will have one old strand and one new strand. So, half is conserved and half is created new. So, this theory was proved by the two scientists Meselson and Stahl. Matthew Meselson and Franklin Stahl, these two scientists. Here's their experiment. They did their experiment on the bacterium E. coli, Escherichia coli. Initially, they cultured it in ammonium chloride containing heavy nitrogen, that is N15. So, when they did centrifugation, they got heavy DNA. Next, they passed it into ammonium chloride, which was having N14. And after every 20 minutes, when they did centrifugation, in the first generation, that is after 20 minutes, they got hybrid DNA, which is having intermediate density. And in the 40th minute, when they got generation 2, they've got both intermediate DNA and light DNA. So, in the centrifuge tube, you can find intermediate as well as light DNA, proving semi-conservative replication. If it weren't semi-conservative replication, then in the 20th minute in generation 1, here the heavy strand is shown in red and the light strand is shown in green. It would have been one fully green and one fully red. Or over there it would have been one fully red and 3 fully green. But this experiment by Meselson and Stahl proves semi-conservative method of DNA replication. Cistron is a segment of DNA that codes for a polypeptide. And there are two conditions, monocistronic or polycistronic. Monocistronic condition is seen in higher organisms, eukaryotic organisms, whereas the lower bacteria and other prokaryotes, they have polycistronic condition, where one promoter directs the synthesis of an mRNA that can be translated into more than one polypeptide. A good example given here, that of tryptophan operon. It is having all these operons. You can see genes like E, D, C, B, A. All of them are involved in tryptophan metabolism. But if it is eukaryotes, it is monocistronic condition, where one promoter directs the synthesis of only one mRNA that can be translated into one polypeptide. But you can see it is split genes. We will be coming to that, split genes. Before that, let us see transcription in prokaryotes. The first step, initiation, where the RNA polymerase attached to the DNA. There is also the sigma factor. Then it is reading the strand, the template strand, and forming the RNA. That is called elongation. And finally, termination, where Rho factors will release the enzyme and the newly formed RNA is released. Transcription in prokaryotes, there is only one type of RNA polymerase which forms all the 3 RNAs. The mRNA formed is directly functional. There is no need for splicing. Transcription is followed by translation and both occur in the cytoplasm. But in eukaryotes, there is a complexity. You see, this is the RNA chain forming, but can you see it is split? There are two different colors shown here. One is the intron and the other one is the exon. So, the RNA is forming, but it is not directly messenger RNA. It is the primary transcript called hnRNA, heterogeneous nuclear RNA, which requires splicing. But before splicing, there should be capping and tailing, two processes. Capping at the 5' end with an unusual nucleotide called MGPPP, methyl guanosine triphosphate, and tailing at the 3' end with around 200 to 300 adenylate residues. Then what happens is only the exons or the expressed regions appear in the mature RNA, whereas the unwanted introns, those intervening sequences are removed. They will not appear in the mature RNA. So, here you find the introns are being removed and exons are joined together to form a meaningful messenger RNA. Another picture of splicing. You can see the enzymes called spliceosomes are going to remove intron 1. The unwanted portion intron is shown here in yellow color. Exon 1 and exon 2 are shown in blue color. So, you can see those enzymes have cut away the introns and they join together exons, thus making a meaningful messenger RNA. So, that splicing is required in eukaryotes, and another difference is that they are having 3 different types of RNA polymerases. RNA polymerase 1 will form ribosomal RNA, RNA polymerase 2 will form heterogeneous nuclear RNA, which must be spliced and the introns removed to form the messenger RNA. RNA polymerase 3 will form the transfer RNA. Such a complication is not there in the case of bacteria, prokaryotes. So, splicing is needed. Transcription and splicing will occur only in the nucleus in the case of eukaryotes. So, translation that should happen outside in the cytoplasm. So, we will see translation, that is protein synthesis, where RNA will form proteins. I will be explaining about this in the second part because it is an elaborate thing. This is a symbolic picture showing protein synthesis, where that messenger RNA came out into the cytoplasm. It teamed up with a large subunit of the ribosome and a small subunit of the ribosome. There are other friends like transfer RNA. They have brought the amino acids. If 2 amino acids sit close by, then they are forming peptide bond, and the bond formation is becoming longer. It is becoming a polypeptide and soon it will become a protein. So, this translation should happen in the case of eukaryotes in the cytoplasm. About that I will be mentioning in part 2. So, hope all of you have understood. Thank you very much.